meeting for the Village of Cary for Tuesday, November 3rd, 2015 to order with roll call, please.
Chapman?
Yes.
Dudek?
Yes.
Kraus?
Here.
Kozler?
Here.
Cavelli?
Here.
McAlpine?
Here.
Thank you. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we move into open forum, I'd like to introduce our new village attorney, Adam Simon, who has joined us from Ansel Glink for the time being. It's a pleasure having you. As everybody knows, Mike Coppage has moved to become a judge in McHenry County, so he's working on that right now, and we're delighted to have you with us. If there's any questions, feel free to ask at any time. Keep us in line, gently, but keep us in line.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, and welcome to the Village of Cary. Moving to the open forum where the public is invited to make an issue-oriented comment of any matter of public concern not otherwise on the agenda. Did we have anybody sign in? Nancy?
No.
Nope. So we'll go ahead and open and close open forum unless somebody else had something they wanted to say. No. We'll go ahead and close open forum. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the October 6, 2015 Village Board meeting.
So moved. Second.
Roll call, please.
Chapman?
Yes.
Kraus?
Yes.
McAlpine?
Yes.
Dudek?
Abstain.
Cavelli?
Yes.
Kozler?
Yes.
Thank you. And we have one employee recognition, Jim Stefani, who works in our Public Works Department. He's a maintenance 2 worker. He's been with the village for 10 years, and we want to congratulate him and thank him for all his efforts throughout the Public Works Department. So thank you very much. One more thing on the mayor's report. As everybody knows, we're members of McHenry County Council of Governments. We have the Village of Cary, as well as myself, have the honor of hosting our next meeting, which is November 18th here at the Village of Cary. It will be at Galati's. They will be the venue for our meeting, and you are all welcome to attend if you'd like. So please let us know, and we will get you guys on the list. So, and with that, I think Chris, did you want to talk about that?
We'll talk about that under my report.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda items number 1 through 4.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call, please.
Chapman?
Yes.
McAlpine?
Yes.
Kraus?
Yes.
Kozler?
Yes.
Cavelli?
Yes.
Dudek?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving to items for separate action, I will entertain a motion to approve ordinance 015-11-01, amending section 10.16.030 stop streets and section 10.16.035 yield streets established of the Code of Ordinances of the Village of Cary for certain streets.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Hey, Chief.
Hi, thank you very much. This is kind of a joint endeavor between the police department and Public Works. Public Works, of course, doing more work than we did, because that's what they normally do. But we can do this because under our code, we've adopted state vehicle laws. That's under section 10.08.005, and under the Illinois Vehicle Code 625 ILCS 511.208, we're given the authority to regulate the highways and streets within our jurisdiction, which includes designating through streets and highways, and then vehicles having to stop or yield when crossing certain streets. So we have the authority to do this. The Public Works Director is the entity that will post or cause to be posted suitable signs for all through streets, one-way streets, alleys, and stop intersection, so it falls to the Public Works Director to install those signs. In regards to the ordinance itself, this is more of a housekeeping issue in terms of the Public Works Department going around and identifying where stop signs and yield signs have already been either installed or will be installed. Now, in my review of it one more time before we came down here today, under section 10.16.00030 stop streets, section B, if you go down to where the C's, because they're in alphabetical order, you'll see Cary Algonquin Road at Route 14, four-way stop sign. Well, that's controlled by a signal. So we would probably need to amend that in regards to striking it, similar to what they did when they struck the reference to Cary Algonquin Road at West Main Street, which was a four-way stop at one time and now is controlled by a signal. Other than that, I would entertain any questions you might have as it relates to this ordinance.
So Chief, is it your intent at some point in time to put signage at the uncontrolled intersections?
They want to have the ability to do that, and currently it's uncontrolled, is what it meant. Now, I will tell you that I am very familiar with, for example, the yield intersection at Crabtree and Tanglewood, and that wasn't included in an ordinance, so it had been erected or installed, and there was nothing to back up that the yield sign was there. So this is a housekeeping issue as much as anything else.
My only comment is I'm not a real fan of a lot of signage. Sign pollution to me is annoying. I'm sure you're familiar with the new circle at Kelsey and Roberts Road where there seems
I've driven through it a couple times.
It's a fantastic intersection, but there must be 100 signs there. It's just ridiculous. So I guess my comment would be, unless any of these uncontrolled intersections have had a history of accidents, I'm not a fan.
And I think that as it relates to the information that was provided to you in the memo, it's more related to controlling intersections versus not having them controlled. So that is where this ordinance and the installation of these traffic control devices fall. It certainly makes my job easier in terms of determining fault somewhere down the line if there were a traffic crash at that intersection. And I know that there is, in the manual uniform traffic control devices, there's a parameter that indicates that at any intersection where a special problem exists or where engineering judgment indicates problems to be susceptible to correction by the use of a yield sign. And I believe that that's what Director Morimoto was relying on when he identified some of these intersections as yield intersections.
Any other questions for the chief? Roll call, please.
Cosler,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Chapman,
Yes.
Dudek,
I'll defer to the chief's expertise, yes.
Cavelli,
Yes.
Kraus.
Yes.
Thank you. Moving forward to a discussion regarding community event grant program. Oops, I flipped one up, sorry. I'm going to move it to regarding Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Mayor. This item, as the board's aware, normally would be on the committee of the whole agenda tonight. Obviously, we had other business that occupied our time, so I put this on as a discussion item at the village board. This had been brought forward in discussion with me by Trustee Covelli. The last meeting, we had discussed having a preliminary conversation about this, and I wanted to outline some ideas for you for further thought and feedback from you about this concept. As we attached to your packet, and you see, 2013, we spent a significant amount of time on an economic development plan for the village, which has resulted in a variety of projects that have begun to be implemented in the community, and some that continue to need to be on our priority list. Why I think an economic development, and I'll call it maybe at this point a task force, would be helpful, as I believe it would integrate a community buy-in component for this village board is almost an advisory task force for a variety of the now economic development decisions that we find ourselves making as the economy has bounced back some. When I started in 2011, and why this was brought forward to me at that time to start it, we had a lot of housekeeping items to get in order, kind of back of the house from a staff code, process workflow standpoint, and a lot of those, not all, but many of them have been completed. And now the economy has shown some signs of bounce back. And so I think it's more appropriate time to think about a panel of 3 to 5 business representatives, most likely from the community, that can be from a diversity of different types of business components and other residents you might see appropriate. I suggest the 3 to 5 number because I believe that's a more manageable group to maintain over time. Some of the ideas that I had is to making this an attractive volunteer opportunity for our residents and business owners is to have it be possibly scheduled differently than, say, a zoning board meeting and or a village board meeting or other night commitment. We found from time to time that isn't the best opportunity for all necessarily in terms of their balance of responsibilities. And it might be possible to have, depending on the 3 to 5 people you might decide to move forward with, more of a daytime, project, afternoon or morning, whatever, 8 o'clock in the morning type setup, so there can be a solid hour of activity, and then, people move on to their day. It might help us attract some different folks that would be interested. I like a task force because I think it makes it easier for you to consider for moving forward with in a more quick fashion, as opposed to a bureaucratic process involved in appointments, those kinds of things. I certainly want to, as this idea is fleshed out, work with Attorney Simon and considering, procedurally how this would move forward. But I think that kind of model would be helpful to Brian and myself as we continue to, bounce ideas off, more of a think tank approach. Helping bring ideas back to you, have ideas referred to this body by you that may be before us, more of a flexible schedule. I don't think this needs to be per se a 1 meeting a month group. It could be, say, 6 times a year by schedule, but by demand as well. If there's a project or an idea or something that's come forward, as you understand, to be nimble in this economy, we need to move on development projects that we do want when they come in, which means we have to be able to be flexible. And I think that having a group from the front end that would be understanding that this would be on demand as well, to be able to call upon them for feedback, I think that would be helpful. I've seen this in action, and I've served the village of Grays Lake in Lake County, 2 stints in the 90s. Saw it work very well. It continues today. It's more of a economic development commission approach that's had 5 or 6 members on it from the business community, many of which I think are still on it for many years. So I've seen it work before and staffed it in other communities. I think we're at a better time now where this can be helpful. I don't think we need to make it too complicated if you want to pursue it. So I'd like your feedback on this idea, and certainly I'd bring back a memo to you with more of the, the format and legalities, procedures associated with it. Again, I highly recommend more of a task force approach, but I'd be open to your feedback and happy to, with Brian, answer any questions.
I like it. I think it's a great idea. I think just even seeing the feedback about Lou Malnati's coming to town, people are so excited about business. So I think anything that we can do to speed along the process, get some businesses here, development. I think people want to shop, dine, do entertainment and carry. So I think this is a priority. We should make it a priority. And I like the idea of a task force to help us do that. And I like the flexibility you talked about too. So I think that's important.
One comment I've had, because Trustee Dudek had asked me to reflect upon some of the pros and cons about why in the past we moved away from this at one point years ago, and then we kind of deferred on this in 11. One of the things I think is important, I really do think it ought to be business representatives, where I think, it gets complicated sometimes when it's more of a sales approach. I think that can be challenging. I think that as we used a committee approach subcommittee approach for the comprehensive plan, we called upon some corporate citizens that, some of which quietly opined on that, process for us, from manufacturing companies, et cetera, because we just asked them to be part of that, and that was helpful. And some of them have limited time and things like that, but to get, those kind of people on this, I think are really important. They're existent, businesses that have, a couple hundred employees, some of them. They're great, stewards already, for our village. And I think getting that kind of experience level with us is part what would be really helpful.
Would we be able to get some copies of the minutes and that from back in 2004 when the village must have discussed it, getting rid of it at that time?
Sure.
2004 was like just at the peak, before we were getting to the peak, and that was when the economy was humming and that.
Yeah.
And if things were so good at that time, why did they decide to get rid of it? In 2011, when I came on the board, one of the other trustees that came on with me, he had talked about that in the past also, and I don't think it was something that he was interested in, but at the same time, I think then we went in the direction of hiring an economic development director, and that's the reason why we have Brian sitting here today, was instead of going with the committee structure and having an economic development committee, we decided to hire an economic development director person. So are we looking now to add to what Brian's position was originally intended to do?
I think from my standpoint, economic development's been on my priority list since I started here, based on what the board asked for. And I mean, you see a plan that we've developed, you've seen the economy's bounce back, some visible signs of progress, more that we'd like to see. We've seen, from an industrial standpoint, in some of our industrial districts, some great add backs that are more quiet and less popular, but good in terms of filling vacant space that's been vacant for a long time. I think about some of the businesses adjacent to, and I'll say Coleman's in the Park, right around that area, there's been some great fill-ins of businesses that have come to Cary from other, even McHenry County communities. And you're absolutely right, our residents, they're shopping, dining, those are important. And we all know also the tax-based components of filling those spaces with viable businesses that create jobs in Cary. That's also a huge part, and a number of our corporate citizens have brought that to us through the comprehensive plan process. So yes, you can look at the minutes. I don't know that you should guide your decision by what we did or didn't do in 2004. I do think that having some business interaction on a more scheduled basis with staff is helpful. I mean, if you would allow us to do that, I think it's useful. I don't think it's burdensome. I think it's just a different perspective. It doesn't take the place of what we're doing or supplant it. It just adds to it, adds to some of the ideas that we can move forward with and sell in the community. And I think we have a great Chamber of Commerce, great guidance from them, and in many of the activities that they do. We're not trying to supplant that, but we need, I think, on a task force basis, some more feedback. I also know that we can continue to report to you some of the things that we're doing that have been asked for in reporting, static documents, things like that. That's all important and useful and what we're here to do. I just think getting this real-time feedback is useful, and when asked, I said, yeah, I think it's a good idea. It wasn't necessarily a great idea in 11. Now I think it's a different time.
In terms of feedback, what exactly are you looking for? I mean, what kind of feedback would they give you in terms of the Lou Malnati's coming into town? I mean, what would have they said anything differently than what Brian was doing as part of his job?
I don't know necessarily.
I'll let you answer the question.
I don't know necessarily that it would be different than what Brian would say, or I would ask them necessarily about that. I'm thinking about, honestly, development incentives. That's one thing that comes to the top of my mind. We've had comments on my work plan about looking at impact fees and what impact does that have on the community? How does that tie back to the business development mechanisms we have? What about some of these other philosophies that we've talked about as projects that come before us? What different take might the business community have to add to the decisions that you make as a board? I don't know that I'd want to tie it down and have it, a box around it in terms of what we would have it be. I think my suggestion would be to be somewhat flexible, and as issues come up, And I certainly could fill an agenda for a year off the top of my head on items, but it's what's most important to you that is what matters. So I think it adds to what we're doing. It doesn't detract, and it doesn't supplant what we're already doing.
Are we able to get a copy of Graves Lake's model?
Sure.
What they do, so we can kind of just get a better feel for how everything kind of works?
Sure. That's the one that came to mind because I've experienced it. I mean, there's certainly others, other communities that some of us have worked for. That's one where it's a size community similar to us. They obviously have a lot of, through annexation and other development more towards the Mundelein area, huge corridor tied to the possible extension of Route 53. So they have a lot of different development pressures on them, but they are a sized community that looks at things very similar to us in many ways. So I do think it's a good comparable. We also could possibly have a guest speaker from their Economic Development Commission, someone that's been on the commission for a while. It might be an interesting way to answer some of your questions about, well, what's brought forward, how is it dealt with, things like that.
I like that.
I think it's a great idea.
Any other
I think
comments on that?
it's a way to supplement what's already being done and take it to that next level. And I think everyone has it as a priority, economic development here. So if there's a way to gather more information from different sources that can bring more in what we're looking for, it might be things that we're not necessarily thinking about. And if you're bringing in different business leaders that are dealing with different communities around or different areas and seeing how they're implementing different strategies, I think that can definitely be beneficial to us.
Yeah, I'm supportive of this as well, especially if it's, result is outreach to businesses without costing the taxpayers more money. It seems logical, like what's the harm it could do? When I look over the economic plan in our packet here, I don't see a lot of progress that's been made, even though we are making incremental progress and businesses coming to Cary. So I just view it as one more method of attracting business here in Cary.
I guess that's me. You're looking at me. I think it's likewise. There's no way you cannot feel that it's an excellent suggestion. The biggest challenge I think we have is not to be a Debbie Downer or anything, but to get people that are going to be committed to this. I've had the experience of seeing a lot of local businessmen in 10 years come up to that podium with a lot of criticism about this town. And those are not the kind of people I would like to have on this committee because they're not positive, proactive people. They're complainers. And I think there's folks on this dais that could name a half a dozen people right now that would fit that bill, including some of the realtors in town. So I think we have to be careful about who you would put on that commission. And I do think if you went back and listened to people like Bruce Kaplan, who served on it at one point, you'd hear stuff like that the people are going to make it or break it. It's a great idea, but if we get a bunch of people who are complainers, it's not going to go anywhere.
Positive vision.
Yeah, well, just one of the people that comes to mind right off the top of my head is Malnati's. That's a big name. It's a big, franchise company. And while they're not building a nice standalone restaurant, which I'm sure all of us would like, they still picked Cary to open up a shop. Somebody like that, I would like to definitely nominate for a committee like this because they're new here. People at Sage, obviously, they're very supportive. But again, to me, I think we just have to be careful on people, that's all. But it is a great idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
If the position of this committee and the function does not do any of the things that our community development director does, then I'd be in favor of it. If it crosses the line or if it takes away some of those responsibilities as was clearly delineated in the contract, as we were told, then I think we need to be aware of that. And for the new members, you should probably get a look at the contract. The contract for the community development director that we signed. And
We don't have a contract.
The
Job description?
The job description. Yeah.
I just look at it as a way to open up some avenues for people that do want to serve in a capacity to help the betterment of our community.
Love it.
Did you have one in Glenview, Chris?
We did not.
Really?
It was very interesting why we did not. During the base redevelopment years, there was a group that reviewed more as a separate regulatory body the projects because of the veracity of speed behind them. But we did not have a body that was formally formed other than as a task force basis for the downtown. We had a group that was formed, and then later there was a set of corridor planning projects that came up, and most of those were business community folks, but no. And we had an economic development person, and that's changed as the economy has changed. And I think that a resident interest group properly picked is a good point. I absolutely see a value in it. If it's kept nimble, kept non-bureaucratic, kept, a couple high-level things, I think that's important. And I don't think it has anything to do with the job description of the community development director at all. I think it has to do with supporting this board, supporting the community development staff, supporting, what you've asked for in my strategic plan. And I think it's the right time for it as well. I think we're more primed and professionally staffed than we were 4 years ago. And I think that's why I recommend it now. 4 years ago, we weren't ready.
At the same time that you're doing that, would you also direct council to review our ordinance that we had asked regarding appointments and commissions, committees?
In terms of how to seat this task force?
Yeah, so I gave that we had worked on, just to have them review it for the words, to make sure that the words themselves are right. I think they are. I mean,
your point is in terms of how these folks get selected and they're approved?
yeah, I'd like us to get that legislation, that ordinance in place before we select anybody, so that we have it done first.
Is it my understanding that you don't want to, that you're not recommending an appointment process at all, right?
That was my initial thought tonight. Yes, and with the devil being in the details, of course, and why this is typically a committee item. Of course, wanted to talk to, council about this, but I don't know. I mean, it's up to the mayor and board. And I mean, I just think being nimble and being flexible with it without being overly bureaucratic is part would attract people to it and make it immediate, rather than, load it down with process.
Any other comments on that? Good. Let's move forward to a discussion regarding the community event grant program.
Thank you, Mayor. Jacob Reif, Assistant Administrator, will assist me in presenting the draft policy. I wanted to also indicate that this is typically an agenda item for Committee of the Whole. It's on Village Board tonight due to the volume of items on Committee of the Whole. This is a preliminary draft. It's designed to be a starting point of discussion. I think there's some good feedback we've already received since this was penned and put in the packet from a variety of folks, and we'd like to hear from them tonight, including Attorney Simon, about some thoughts. But this is first cut at what you had asked, as you may recall, from board discussion. The thought was, would it be possible to have some amount of the revenue stream that comes from video gaming revenue to the Village of Cary that was approved, I believe, in 2014, considered and or dedicated in some way to a community event grant program. While at this time, as was indicated when this was first brought up off the board floor, those revenues are dedicated fully to the corporate fund, as was pointed out accurately. From time to time, there may be new license holders that would come in to ask for additional permits that are separate from the baseline that's already in the budget. And of course, through the budget process, you have some discretion over determining where various sources of revenue should be applied to. So not to bog this down in that, but the concept was, would 30 or 40,000 in a bucket account from gaming revenues be appropriate and or possible to be dedicated to community event sponsorships and/or grants to help seed community events that, of course, the one that comes to mind has been our Fall Festival that came from Chamber Village Partnership. But the gist of the conversation from the board was, what about smaller amounts for more grassroots level projects that could come forward from service groups, church groups, potentially other groups that also provide a service to us and would help create opportunities for our residents and possibly business community that we don't already have. So that's the setup. Jake worked with some model documents that Trustee Chapman brought forward. Our effort was to simplify as much as possible, thinking about the stakeholder side of this being those that would apply for it, and what process that would be, reasonable for them to pursue. We may have oversimplified it, and if you have thoughts tonight, we'd like to hear from you about them, and would like to hear from maybe next Attorney Simon about his thoughts on this as well.
Thank you. There's certainly nothing unlawful about the community supporting events that promote business, promote tourism, promote economic development. Those are things that are all traditional municipal activities, and so you can support other organizations that dovetail with your mission. The comments I shared with Chris earlier this week were that there was no set of criteria to determine which events would dovetail with your mission. There are lots of organizations in the community, I imagine, that have worthwhile events that might not relate to a traditional village activity. So I think some criteria need to be established to measure objectively whether or not an event would qualify for a grant, so that there isn't a risk that the board picks and chooses on a case-by-case basis, do we like them or not? So I'm concerned about that, so I'd like to see some criteria established, especially if it's going to be an application process. You could eliminate the application process entirely and just create a budget on an annual basis during your budgeting, budget planning, and choose events you want to promote. Because in that case, the village is just deciding on its own what it wants to do instead of evaluating other people's applications. So those are my comments.
Open to the floor for any discussion or questions.
Just a clarification, the board voted to set aside $40,000 from the gaming revenue initially, and so that $40,000 is set aside. The documents that Chris gave out look really good. It lays out the who, what, when, where, how much, and there's quantitative questions on there as to how many people it will involve in the village. What type of an impact will it have on our community? So we do have criteria in there so that we can be objective with each request, regardless of the level of participation. So if we did have a smaller club that wanted to plant flowers downtown, in flower things like we used to have, then we could give that, special fund, if it was $250 or $400, whatever. But they would still fill out the very simple paperwork, and I commend Chris on that, making it very easy. But I think it's great. It'll draw people here, and we'll have, and I expect we'll have, different levels of participation.
Why would eliminating the application eliminate the bias of this board then? If we don't have an application, but we're still voting on whether or not we would approve somebody coming before us for money, why does that?
So if you have different community organizations applying for money, and you're asked to judge the application, then you are potential, unless there are objective criteria that you're applying and judging those applications, if there are no criteria and you're applying absolute discretion on a case-by-case basis, there's a potential that the distribution of funds could be applied discriminatorily. Or there could be a perception that it was applied discriminatorily. You could say yes to a group that you like and say no to a group that you disagree with their point of view. Where if you added some objective criteria, that would insulate the application process from that type of risk.
I see. So you're saying establish the criteria, but not have the application?
You can have the application. I don't have a problem with the application. If you have an application, you should have objective criteria to apply to the application. The alternative is to eliminate the application process and not have community organizations solicit money from you. The board would, on its own initiative, decide which events to support that dovetailed with the village's own mission. Through staff, investigation, through board investigation, it would be part of the collaborative process you guys go through as part of budgeting.
Through that second option, I would envision that during the budget process that we'd allocate the funds for, these specific events.
I would be concerned that if we don't have some objective, something set up, it could be very suspect for us. I don't want us to get into a situation where someone is saying, whether those criteria say we need your budget and we're willing to support 10% of it or whatever it would be. I don't know what, I'm just throwing out something to have, something that's measurable so no one can come back and be concerned that we're picking and choosing who are the winners.
And that was in Chris's paperwork. They are required to submit a budget.
Right, but maybe there's something to be even further with that. So if someone has a budget of $500 and someone has a budget of $10,000, I don't want to go, okay, well, we're going to give you 100% of your budget, but we're going to give you 5% of yours. I just think we have to have something that someone's not going to come back to us from a questionable standpoint that we can say, well, here's how we determined how we came up with how much of a grant we're going to give what a percentage is or something of that nature.
Sure, and that would be determined by the amount of participation, by the scope of the project, how many people are going to be involved. So for smaller projects.
Sure, so even if we have that, then again, just making it that we know that everybody even knows when they're applying.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing.
And that's fair. And that's what the community groups would be wanting. I'm not in favor of letting the village and staff pick it, because then it defeats the purpose of encouraging groups to come up and come up with ideas. And projects come up from time to time. I know in Foxford Grove, we had a meeting every April with all the community groups to try and get as many of those events that were going to be held during the year, on a calendar so that, we could all work together. But there were always events that came up that were, not planned at the April time. So that makes it a little bit difficult.
So Dave, you made a comment, I think you said something to the extent of potentially church groups. And I guess I asked the village attorney what his opinion would be of including church groups as groups that could petition for this.
I don't think that they should be inherently disqualified. I think that they're capable of performing services that are similar to municipal services. But I don't think that necessarily because the organization sponsoring the event is religious doesn't inherently disqualify it, so long as the function itself is designed in a way that is business promotion, economic development, tourism, those types of things. If a church wanted to hold a Taste of Cary, and I could see that would be tourism and economic development, I wouldn't disqualify it because the church was a sponsor.
So as long as the whole village benefits from it, not just their individual.
Oh yeah, St. Monica's runs the carnival in Meadowdale, so
I think that's generally what you see in looking at these examples for, community events, special events. It's, the village gets some kind of perceived benefit out of it, whether it's to the downtown or, there's people staying in hotels, which we don't have here, but that's what you see in other communities.
Pretty soon.
So I have a question. If we were just to budget, let's say, the maximum, which we have here, the $40,000 a year, and we didn't go through the application process and we just kept everything the same, wouldn't that just be simpler? Because they're still going to come to the committee of the whole. You're still going to ask all these questions that are on this application. Then we don't run into the issue that you talked about with, I don't know what terminology you use, but is that bias. So thank you. So it almost seems like we're still accomplishing what you're trying to do, but then we're avoiding that, and it would just seem easier. Am I missing something?
That's certainly up to the board.
Okay.
Jake, Chris, what percentage of villages use this sort of program?
It's not the norm, but I've seen it. And I saw through the recession, many that existed disappear because of revenue cuts, but there are still some that are out there that I'm aware of. And I mean, you certainly could reach out if we needed some more policies, things like that. It's not unheard of.
I'm not asking you to do that. I'm firmly in the middle on this one. I'd like to support events here in Cary, but I'm also was one of the original people back at the budget meeting that said if you're handing out money, you got to have a process for it. So I'm very cautious when I am thinking about spending taxpayers' money, and that's what we're doing. I want it to benefit the village, and if it does, that's great. And they, some of these things would have the potential to do that, but my concern I spoke to Trustee Chapman about was fairness. If we're going to support the Main Street Fest, well, we need to have criteria so that we know and we can be fair with the distribution of money. So I don't know. I'm in the middle. I'm really sort of against funding, using taxpayer money for this, but then it also has the potential for doing some good things. So.
Well, I think that part of this also uses the funds from the video gaming, which is not taxpayer money. I mean, it's...
Okay, yeah.
Well, I would say too, to add to your comments, Trustee Kostler, if the board wants to proceed with this, we can certainly do that. And it's something that we can look at, each budget year. I mean, there's some years where we just may not be able to do this program once we go through the budget process.
But we need clarity because we're not in the budget process until basically February, March. And it was my understanding from the press on this issue that there was desire to get it live now. And, we can come back to you with a more finalized discussion about this with final policy, details of budget, do we need a budget amendment, things like that. But we just wanted to understand if this isn't, we want to do it now project or something to wait to budget workshop.
We currently, though, set aside money, though, don't we have money aside right now? So if somebody could possibly come to us at the next meeting and say they want to do something.
No, we don't have it set aside for events that are not part of our base budget, no. I mean, that doesn't mean we couldn't look at how to fund a project if it came before us and you wanted it, that there are ways to look at it budget holistically to try to create a situation where that can occur, but there's not per se a line item set aside.
For just a general line item, because we currently, though, we do have money set aside for the Historical Society.
That is correct, for those specific.
Right, okay.
And that would probably be where we'd look if something was in front of you next month.
The vote that we took $40,000 of the $48,000 that we've received from the state of Illinois for gambling money and set that aside for this community development fund. So yes, there is $40,000 available right now from that $48,000. And so the other $8,000 went back to the general fund for the vote of this board at the last board.
Was that at the committee or the board?
That was at the board meeting. That was not at the committee. That was a vote at the board meeting.
I guess how staff had took that was just in a discussion about we could set aside these amount of dollars.
Yeah, no, that was to do it, get it done, and be able to be ready, because we didn't want to wait until the budget thing. We also was our intention to make sure that there was a dedicated revenue stream, just like everything else that we need to have that is going to be a funded budget line item, and that's what this would be. It would come from the video gambling proceeds, and that there would be a dedicated revenue stream. And so that way you don't have to worry about thinking about it every budget year.
I don't know that you don't have to think about it every budget year, but I think that I would be glad to bring back to you at the next meeting the finality to this, and we can move forward.
Okay.
So, not to not to be one to throw water on this, but are you clear at the staff level that in fact what Dave suggested is the case? Because it doesn't look to me like you are about the $40,000.
You know, I don't want to debate it. I mean, I just rather look back at the record and make sure my recollection's correct. And I think that was the spirit, whether it be the vote or the spirit was a number around 40,000. That's what was said. And but from a budgetary standpoint, you know, it's not there now in the budget. There are other line items, as Trustee Kraus indicated, that potentially could be supplanted, you know, so I think it's more, you know, art than science, but I think that I need to come back to you with those questions completely answered and to try and meet what the spirit of the board tonight has been.
Because I think there's two pieces to this. There's the funding piece and then there's the implementation piece. And I'm not sure we have either at this point in time. To your exact quote, Chris, we haven't budgeted for this, so if the board wants to do that, and perhaps that's what maybe the board thought was done when we had this conversation, that we were going to budget 40,000 for something like this, then I think that's part of the budget process. And once we implement that, then we have to have a process for how do we use it. Otherwise, it's going to sit there. And to that point, I like Kim's suggestion, because I don't want to make this more difficult than it needs to be. We've gotten along for decades without a real difficult process, albeit not with a whole lot of requests, but still not with a lot of process. And I don't think we need to establish a lot of process. I think it should be fairly straightforward. That's my personal opinion. But I do think...
I think we're saying the same thing. I just think what's important is a third distinction to the two you just made is the concept of it being a perpetual. I mean, the reality is every year, typically we have, let's say, a CIP that's multi-year and focused, but we review the assumptions and the projects. The assumptions on how revenues are dedicated also can be reviewed and discussed at budget. And so, no, we don't think we want to revisit this necessarily every year. If the current board is on board with it, it's probably a 30-second conversation, but typically at budget, we're reviewing our assumptions and discussing where our money's dedicated, so I just wanted to make that clear.
But I think Dave's point originally was this would be funded by the video gaming money. What happens if sometime in the future video gaming is illegal? Then you've lost your funding source. So,
then that would go away.
It's not quite as simple as it seems, and then that's why I think it needs to have the process of the annual establishment on the budget, yeah.
Well, currently, we're not getting any of that money.
Exactly.
Right, because of the state situation, so we'd be up a creek.
I think I understand for tonight where we're at.
Okay.
We need to fine tune this a little bit more.
Sure. Thank you for your feedback.
Moving forward with the administrator's report, Chris.
Thank you, Mayor. One main item tonight is I wanted to indicate that, as you recall, through the staff process, one of our work plan items is completion of a water or wastewater plant study, and we engaged the services of Strand Associates early part of, I believe, 2015. And we're at the point now at staff level, we're reviewing final reports, and we're ready to come to you and present in public to the village board, which we would recommend at potentially November 19th in special session, a complete report regarding the next steps for our wastewater plant. We have some state regulatory issues to go over with you that were main subject to this study, as well as there's a component about the concept of providing shared services to a neighboring municipality, potentially with capacity in the plant. There's, of course, other questions that you'll obviously have about, well, what was that capacity created for in the first place, and how do we handle new business coming to town, those kind of things. But I think this would be a very interesting night. The question is whether the 19th is the right one. But certainly it's probably a 90-minute to 120-minute exercise to go through with you in detail this consultant's report, lay out the policy questions, and have you help provide us guidance for next steps. It's a major part of the Public Works work plan, and we'd like to get your feedback. So 19th was what was brought forward. That's before the Thanksgiving holiday. We are concerned that between Thanksgiving and the Christmas holiday, it gets difficult to plan, especially special meetings with what other business we already had planned. So wanted to ask your thoughts on that. while also acknowledging that, as the mayor said earlier tonight, the 18th is proposed for some that may want to attend the McHenry County Council of Governments event in Cary that evening. So I just wanted to put that out there for feedback.
I'd like to meet with staff early next week on an idea for our wastewater system to turn part of that into a economic profit generator. What I heard last week from my meeting was that phosphorus is being recovered, and I know we have a unfunded mandate to test for phosphorus for our water systems coming up, and it's going to require some modification. And some of the communities that are out there in the state of Illinois have actually been collecting and selling that phosphorus as a high-grade fertilizer and making millions of dollars. And I think it's something that we haven't thought about yet. So I would sure like to meet with Eric, and if it's a consultant or whatever, but at least with Eric early next week, please.
Okay.
What time, Chris?
Flexible, 6 o'clock would be suggested. You know, we'd have probably a meal before, and we'd do it, you know, here in this room because we need the screens. But that would be suggested depending on work schedules.
Just the 19th seemed to work for you, Jim?
6 to 8.
Ellen? Jeff? Dave?
What day is it?
The 19th.
It's a Thursday.
Thursday? Okay. Yeah.
Kim? Checking.
I'm looking, I should be good.
Thank you. That'll be
Rick, you're good?
Yeah.
That'll be led by Director Morimoto and the team from Strand, and appreciate your willingness to do that as a special project. That's all I had tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Department head reports. Chief, do you have anything? Jake? Brian?
Just real briefly, I know it was mentioned by a few trustees, the Lou Malnati's, they are wrapping up the build out for that tenant space. And from what I'm hearing, they might actually be open this week for business. So it's a good addition, just knowledge from that standpoint, have them located in the town.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, the newspaper's reporting, we'll ask Caitlin if it's true, but supposedly pizza's delivered tomorrow night. I read earlier today, so we'll see.
I read that too.
I don't know.
Any other future agenda items in discussion by the village board? None?
I have one.
Okay.
Where are you? If that's okay
Yes,
with you?
go.
Okay.
Let her rip.
I'm asking the board a consensus. If you feel that I can have everything in my packet, including executive session, I would just like to discuss it, or you can put it on the agenda for next time for discussion, whichever you decide to do.
I'll talk with you offline about it and then see, exactly what you want. I don't mind talking with you, after this and have it on for discussion for the next meeting.
What would everybody else like to do?
I'll talk with you individually too.
I don't care.
That's what I was going to talk to you earlier about when I said the microphones are on.
Oh.
So, yeah, I'd be happy to talk more about it with you,
Yeah.
Okay.
and then we could have a discussion.
Okay. Discussion with the board or just discussion alone?
Well, I'd like to, you feel like you're not getting all the information,
Correct.
and I'm not sure. I'd like to kind of compare then what information you're not getting as opposed to what I am getting. Because I did see your email and I wasn't really sure what you were referring to.
Executive session, memoranda, and paper is the issue.
Okay.
Kim, you look like you had something to say?
Nancy's in our
I think
executive
she
session,
should be
so,
getting it.
I don't mind if she gets paperwork. She's in our sessions, so, I think it's an easy discussion, personally.
Yeah, I don't know, for the people in the audience may not really realize what's being discussed here is Clerk Bragg is wanting to receive all the same information we do as trustees on the upcoming meetings, all the paperwork we receive, and she hasn't been, from my understanding, hasn't been privy to all of it.
Correct. I
So-
just wanted a consensus of the board and to see how they felt about it, because that's what I was told that I should do. So that's what I'm doing.
I'm under the impression that the clerk is entitled to anything in this village hall that I am. That's what her job description says, so I'm not really sure why things are being withheld. That's my point of view.
It was my impression too that you were receiving everything we were getting also.
No.
I mean, you're sitting here with us in executive session,
Correct.
so I mean, it's not a,
No.
so yeah, I think you should receive it too.
Okay.
Well, it looks like we're having the discussion now.
I guess so.
Ellen, do you have any comments on that?
I wouldn't unless someone can explain to me why she shouldn't be getting it, it would make
What-
sense that she would get
what
it. I don't
exactly-
understand, I don't understand what component's missing and why, and maybe I don't know something. That
It's
doesn't
very
make
clear.
sense to me.
That's very clear. The only item I understand that she has a question about is receiving the paper version of any executive session packets that go out to the village board. And any other coordination of a package she wants or parts of package she wants has been complied with. That is the sole piece that apparently, as long as she's been clerk for 8 years, she hasn't received. It hasn't changed of late, and that is the one item that since the last board meeting she asked about. We had a discussion about it earlier today, and I suggested to talk to the mayor and board about it because, ultimately, for some reason, for the last 8 years at least, if not longer, it's not been provided. And if there should be a change, I thought you should be involved in that. And, I don't know if Attorney Simon has any thoughts on it. I don't know we even need to discuss that tonight, but that's the issue.
Okay.
Any rationale? Any?
The statute only requires the clerk be present during executive session. The statute's silent as to what type of materials the clerk is entitled to receive in advance. Whether or not she is able to, or any office holder who's the village clerk, is able to receive those materials is at your discretion. The materials that are distributed for executive session, I would speculate are distributed for policymaking purposes, for the attention of the policymakers. And statutorily, the clerk's role is not to set policy.
Correct.
So that probably sets the basis for why it was excluded originally. But this being my first meeting, that's speculation. But from a statutory point of view, the statute only speaks to the clerk's attendance, and requirement to take meeting minutes is silent regarding any requirement that the clerk receive executive session materials in advance of the meeting.
Is anybody against it?
If that's the only issue, then no, I'm fine with that. That's.
Okay.
Rick, you all right with that?
Yeah, I'm okay with it, but I do have some questions. I'm not on the, on the electronic submission status yet. So are they sent electronically when you send the electronic package?
We can answer that, and the answer is that the graduation of us collectively as a body to iPad use and more confidence in it by elected officials and staff, yes, the prior board got comfortable enough that they wanted e-packets for executive session distribution. We, at the time, worked with Attorney Coppage on, is that allowed? Got to the point where it was. So they've been provided to those that asked for it. As you've seen in the last week or two, we're trying to get you all to the same plane, at least, of receiving, as trustees, Mayor, the same electronic PDFs. You can choose not to use them, but we're standardizing. So yes, we do create it in PDF form for trustees.
Okay, so I'll just offer a little bit of historic insight into this. I'm not adverse to it at all, but I can recall in my earlier terms, probably even Mark before you and I served together, that the executive session minutes were given back to the administrator after the meeting, which I don't know if it's happening on that side of the dais, but I know a couple times early with Kim, I would hand her my executive session minutes and she'd kind of look at me like I'm a little squirrely, like, why am I giving her her minutes? Because it was never pointed out that anybody wanted to collect those. So I'm just speaking from, a little bit of historic perspective. We used to collect them. Why, I don't know, but that was the process. Nancy, you probably remember that.
I do.
And then, secondarily, I think there's the issue of just the concern about confidentiality, right? So if they are distributed electronically, there's nothing to hold back the confidentiality because somebody's got it in email form. It's easy to distribute, right? If you wanted to distribute them, even though they're confidential in nature. I'm more of the opinion that it would be great if they were given out at the meeting, whether they're electronically given out or in paper, and then collected at the end of the meeting so that there's no question, because there's been question. I mean, let's be honest. There's been question that some of the stuff in executive session has gotten to the public, not necessarily in this group, but in a prior board. And that's a concern because those are very important discussions that are had. And I'm just throwing those comments out to try to minimize that sort of potential happening in the future, that's all.
Thank you. I would indicate that as has been at least the best practice in the 3 recent communities I've worked for, including Cary, it's common to have as much as possible robust executive session packet for you, so you come brief to sessions and know, at least in your mind, A, what's being discussed, B, why, and C, some of the objective information to help make your mind up. And yes, those documents are needing to be confidential, and we all understand, I believe, why. I would say that, it's your discretion, your direction of me is to, giving feedback on, volume, the effectiveness of that, et cetera, and on the premise that it's kept confidential, don't have an issue. More is better from my standpoint because you come more prepped. But the packet is not just solely minutes. It shouldn't be. It may have been in the past, but now, you see I give you a summary document that just summarizes the items in the state statute that calls to allow it to be discussed. And, then from time to time, either in person or otherwise, I give you supplemental documentation to help you understand issues and make decisions. So I think we've got a couple separate issues here, but, her request is she just wants the written documents. So that's, I believe, what she brought up tonight.
Well, I think that you have a majority of the board says that that's fine.
Thank you.
Yay.
All right, I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss litigation pending, personnel, collective bargaining, and real estate selling price for sale or lease or purchase or lease.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.